Dr. Levi, welcome to the Harvest Chronicles. How are you?
Thank you. That was Kofu. You know, right.
It's always so fascinating hearing people calling my name. To others, I'd be Scruffle, others, I'd be Scruffy, to others, I'd be something else. It's actually Scruffy. Oh, listen to me saying Scruffy as well. It's actually Dr. Scruffy. It is from Scruffy. I'll tell you the story of but it is taken from Scruffy. Thanks to my sister, I ended up being Dr. Scruffy. As I understand, you are based in Australia currently, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm in Sydney.
Oh, okay. And we are having this conversation because of your paper titled Mental Health and Mental Health Seeking Behaviors Amongst First-Generation Voluntary African Migrants, which you co-authored with Dr. Edith, who unfortunately couldn't join us due to other commitments. And our conversation is mainly going to be framed on this article. Just have a couple of questions for you. And I think as a teaser, I would like to find out if you wrote this because you're an African who finds himself based in Australia, or if there's any other reason that led you to focusing on migrants.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I think this paper wasn't planned to be. I will tell you that because we had a different aim. Our aim was we belong to a network of African academics in Australia. It's called ARNAA. Now, that's the abbreviation. Now, in that network, there's a lot of Africans who have interest in research. And when we started meeting, we thought, what would be the best way for us to keep our collaboration going? Because there's a lot of writing together, doing research together, community activities. This we started building our network. And within that space came up this need to do research. And there were a lot of people talking about mental health within the community. And at that point, there was also some incidents that happened to us where we lost an African fellow through to suicide. And that kind of raised the awareness around each time we finish a meeting, we now talk about self-care. So we devote 5 minutes to discussing about how are you doing. As a group, that network started making that as a part of our agenda. At the end of the meeting, ask ourselves what's happening to you. How are you going? What's work like? Then within that space, that discussion of mental health started growing. It's within that moment that we thought, can we now get people who are interested in this area to do research together? So our research discussion was like, can we look at what is happening within our African community around mental health space? What is out there in the way we seek help? And it was that discussion that led us to start searching preliminary. And we got a group together of those who had that interest, willing to work together. And we started searching the literature and found that there's literally nothing there for us in Australia. I'm like, there's no data around how we seek help. So does it really mean that we're not talking about it? Why is there nothing there? That's where we started digging. And the process of this study was to focus on Australia. But at the end, we found that there was little we can write about Australia from the literature. Then we opened up that search to include other Western countries. In fact, anything outside of Africa. And that's where we were able to get the number of papers that we then went into the study to synthesize. So you could see the broad spectrum of the study was we started talking about mental health. We thought there was a group to work together. There was interest among the group. Then we said, let's do research together. And this became the focus of our discussion. It was in the need to fill the gap for evidence that this paper came about. It was also in the need to collaborate as a group, to start doing something together, to network within us, that people felt the need to write a paper together. So that co-authorship, that relationship, the network we are building, all started from this manuscript. And then in what this whole bubble of things we are going to do from this now that channel us into community work. How do we improve self-care? How do we improve help-seeking behavior? That's now becoming a discussion that we have within the group.
Okay. And having done this, and you and I had an off-air conversation before we started this recording, and you speak about you following up on what you've already started. How do you think your work as far as it concerns African migrants, is going to help benefit them. Where do you see this taking you?
Look, it's a journey for us. It's a journey for all Africans in Australia. And I'll bring it back to the United Nations had a consultative forum in Australia, and they held in different cities. One of those forums that are held in Sydney, in fact, their general summary, which is now being spoken about in different spaces, demonstrated that Africans in Australia face the highest level of discrimination they have ever seen in the world. These were people from the United Nations that go to different countries to talk about mental health and to talk about discrimination and racism. What they found in Australia, they said they have never seen that level of racism and discrimination anywhere else in the world. That was a deal breaker for us. It just means that we need to start taking care of our people. We need to start looking into our space. What can we do beyond just those findings? And that was what fueled our discussion about. I mean, it was within that time we were talking about that this discussion was happening. So we started seeing need for the community to come together to help each other. And from this publication now, I've been invited to speak. I participated in the African Day event where which happened in New South Wales with a lot of people in attendance. And that discussion was also on this paper for me. It was what we can do as a body, as a group, to collaborate, to care for each other. What is the support system? How is it helping us? Why are we not seeking help? What do we need to do? So that is raise the awareness. Communities are talking about it today. In fact, just before this forum, I told you, I had a discussion with a select group of people in Bathurst. Bathurst is in rural New South Wales. And their challenges are quite unique. In the rural spaces, there's a shortage of all workforce. So even when you need help, you don't have a place to go to. So we are now building a community. We started a group, a WhatsApp group, where we talk to each other. We're asking ourselves today, what more can we do to support each other? Because that community group, community support is powerful. Because there's a lot of things as Africans we hold our fingers to. We hold faith, religion, community, family. Those things, we lose them when we come here. We lose some of those. Australia doesn't really believe in religion and faith. There's little about that happening. But within our community, we still hold very close beliefs about those. Those things take us through struggles. So how do we cultivate that and still find a place to hold our hands on if we are in those communities where it's deserted? So this publication has raised that interest in people. When we talk about this last time with Tony, this time people are listening to it. Last time I checked, it's about 1,000 and something views. People are listening. People are hearing it. So that consciousness is now being awoken. People are now talking about it more. Today we're asking, how then do we make this a normal conversation? Mental health, if I ask you that question, Dr. Scoffy, do you have a word for mental health in your language? What do you call mental health in your own language?
That's very interesting because I was sharing with Tony the other day after listening to the recording that you had with him, the podcast recording you had with him, that after you raised a similar question, I asked myself if we have this, and unfortunately we do not. I guess if I were to attempt to do that, I would associate it with being mentally ill, which is not a true definition of what.
No, you're not even saying mentally ill. What is it in your language? What is the word in your language? Tell me the word. What is the word?
There's none.
That's the problem. This is where the discussion begins. If we don't even have a term for something we characterize our people to go through, how would somebody in your village understand it? There's no word. And so how are you going to explain to your old mother at home? What do you tell them? Because their mom, somebody's going crazy. Their head is not correct. The knot in their, somebody told me today, the knot in their head is not connecting. How then do you want to be associated with those languages, even if you're going through the same struggle? You stay away from it. I'm not crazy. I'm not mad, but you are ill. So we don't even have a term. So this discussion has raised that awareness. How then do we redefine mental health? So our people back home, our communities can understand and start to relate with it. At the moment, the word we relate it to is crazy. It's very scary. I don't want to be part of it. It doesn't characterize me, even though I know my struggles are huge. I stay away from that, and then I can't seek help. Because when I say it in the community, they think I'm mad. They think I'm crazy. My head is not correct. You have to man up. So I keep quiet. So I think this conversation and this paper has raised the awareness for people to say, look, it is time for us to really talk about this issue. How best can we address it within our community? So that's what we are doing. We're taking that further in opening up that conversation. And very soon, I think on the 7th of August, we are having a discussion on mental health symposium in New South Wales. It's going to be an online forum. We started sharing the flyers today. We want the community to get together around this. The more we talk about it, the more the young people listen, the more the older people listen, because these generations they're not in line with each other. The younger people who are born here are very different breed. Those who migrated to this place are very different breed. We don't have similar behavior about these things. And that is a big crush. So we are getting these discussions up, we educate both parties so we can come together to understand where we all stand on this.
I wish I could be a part of that conversation. I wish I could be there, but unfortunately, my visit to Australia and your dates, they don't coincide. So I guess I'm going to...
It's an online forum. I would like you to be there. I will invite you to be there.
Geez.
Online. You can be there, and I will let you to be there. It's a good time to chat about it.
That would be super amazing. Thank you. I'd appreciate it quite a lot. You say you're focusing on mental health of migrants, but then what aspects of mental health do you focus on? Because I've been having quite a number of conversations with different experts from different disciplines and industries. And some of them are looking at it. I'll make an example. One is looking at depression. Others are looking at loneliness. I didn't know that loneliness could be regarded as a mental health disorder. And others are looking at it from a different angle as well. What's your angle on the discourse?
And thanks that you said that, because mental health is a wrong word to define mental wellness. So the mental well-being is a wholesome view. It's about both physical and mental health. Now, everybody has got a mental health, but ever since it's been talked about as mental health because that's what we identify that to be. But mental health is everybody. It's depression, anxiety, stress, sleep, not sleeping properly, rest, and loneliness. They are all symptoms of mental health, but they are in a continuum. It changes, it progresses. You could be mentally well today, and tomorrow you don't have good mental health. So that state is changing. It fluctuates. So the reason this education is important to our people, because we all go through that bout of mental health. Sometimes you feel sad at home, at work. Somebody tells you something and you come back home, you're depressed. You feel that's a state, but it's that continuous state when it's prolonged without help, without resetting back the buttons, that becomes an illness. So the mental illness is what the category of what we're looking at now looks like, because at that level, you would need an extra intervention. You would need to have seen a psychiatrist or a psychologist, a counselor, or a mental health specialist. That's where it becomes an issue. But if it's mental health, we all go through it. And we've got this African mentality that we can overcome that. And hopefully we do at some point. But when it builds up without being aware of where you are in that continuum, then you have a problem. You step into that state where you would need someone or professional help to say, hey, mate, you're far off here. Can we step back? So for me, from this manuscript that we've written, we are looking at it from the community point of view. What is the community support that we have when we come here that we can leverage on to make sure that we have that connection?
Yeah.
If people will feel safe to talk to you about their states, then that's a first state of help. If people feel safe to ask, hey, Levi, look, I'm feeling this way today. What do you think about this? And they've opened up to you to say, look, how can I rely on you? What can you do to help me? That community support is what we want to hold on, at least for them. Now, the second part of it that we're working on, we are working with Lifeline to look at how we can create a culturally appropriate model of awareness for our community. Although there's a help for the community here, Australian government is great at putting those help there, but our people don't seek them because they either feel that it's not for them, or sometimes it's the cost barrier, sometimes it's the language barrier. They just feel these people will not understand, they don't get me, so I can't even go there. So they are not willing to seek for that help. And again, that help doesn't then support them. Now, what we're also doing is how then do we work with these bodies, these organizations, to create a system that does facilitate us to seek help, that does provide a safe space where we feel safe enough to ask for that help. And that's what we're doing with Lifeline. That discussion in August, Lifeline is partnering with us to come to the community and have a chat. What can we do together? How can we partner in this? And then with that, we think if they're able to create those kind of models where you can go through the training, mental health training on your own to be more aware of your own self-care, what to do, then that is a starting point. So we are working in that stage. And that's one thing we are doing as well that I want to share with you. Now, the other thing is we found out that when even back home, there is still no study around what mental health looks like. There is no study on mental health, even in Africa, that you can lay your hands on and say, this is a robust study. This is the prevalence of mental health, say, of depression, of anxiety in our communities. So currently, we are now running a questionnaire back home across African countries. At the moment, 17 countries are participating in it. And we've got close to 3,000 people respond to that questionnaire. It will be ending in 2 weeks. From that study, we want to understand what is the burden of mental health conditions in our communities back home, because that is where we are not really talking about. But now that questionnaire is raising conversation. People are emailing me when they complete, because my name is there. Reach out to this person if you feel like you want to have a chat. People email me, look, I'm going through serious issues now. Emails are people I don't know, and I link them up with our group, saying, can you chat with this person? That's what we're seeing now. Because even back home, because it's not being talked about, it's a culture for us. And when we come in here, we rarely change that attitude. We live with it. So if we're trying to change these things, we also need to talk about our people back home, our mothers, our parents, our brothers and sisters. So when you're discussing with them, you're more like on the same page. They can listen to you. So you can call your mom and say, look, I'm not feeling lucky today. She'll say, look, I think I know what you're doing. Can you try this? Do you talk to somebody? They're not telling you, they'll tell you, man up, stop that. You're a man, you're too strong. You cannot be going through this. That's the message right now. But we want to see how we can change that narrative. So that family support can be both ways. So that's what that study is doing now. From that study, we're going to understand what the burden is like in Africa, and then we'll tell that story as well, start doing similar intervention there.
Maybe let me just dwell on that point you raised there. Yeah, the example that you make. You're a man, so such things are very common in our African communities. You don't do certain things because you're a man. You don't cry because a man doesn't cry. You don't express your emotions because a man is not supposed to express emotions, because you're supposed to be this strong individual. What does that do to a man? I'm just thinking of an 18-year-old that is transitioning into maturing as being if I may call it, a man. What does that do to an 18-year-old that is progressing to being a man?
Look, I think it's a tough place, mostly when you're a migrant here, because that is not the same story you find here. So our kids are caught up in the middle, where in our families, they see it in you that this is a man. A man should be a strong person.
Yeah.
And they come to a student community where there's an equality now we're driving between man and woman. So that actually a man is not stronger than a woman is. So they now argue within themselves. They are like, where are we now? My parents are telling me that I have to be the man. I'm stronger. I can't cry. I will say this. And here is a culture where there is that equality that we are thriving. So our young people really get confused if they're being raised in those kind of families that tell them that you have to be a man, you don't cry. And what it does to the man is the man blocks out. The man goes through this stress and doesn't want to share that story at all. So the man feels, if I can't handle it, then nobody can. And they just end it. There's a high rate of suicide now in our community. Men, really. And this is because they are all being taught to be the man. Even if the society throws you out, even though things are not working out, even though you're stressed up, they're at that level where you need help, don't go for it, because really you're a man. You can't tell anybody this story. And because our communities here are not supporting that help seeking. it becomes a challenge because you look back in the community group you come from, you can't even trust anybody to tell that to you. You look back in your family back home, they don't want to hear that story. The demand is you just have to be sending the money, send what you have. And I say, man, you're not sending that. You're not meeting up your family needs. There's nobody to talk to. That's the end of the road. So what we are doing here is men are not men in the context that they are too strong or too powerful. Men go through stress. Men also cry. A friend of mine just launched a book in Brisbane, and he said men also cry because we all have tears too. We have feelings, we have emotions. We can also feel those stress. So it's time for us to orientate our minds that the man is just an adjective. It doesn't mean that the man doesn't have similar attributes that will make you go through the feeling. The brain is the same thing. So if you bottle that for too long, you can't no more suppress that anymore. The next attitude is you've gone beyond that stage and something else happens. So at this point with our children, we're telling them, no, that story, if man, you have to man up, is not true. The man should also cry. Wear your emotions. Tell people what you go through. Meet somebody. Speak to someone. Express your feelings. And good that the education here tells them to be expressive from early stage. So your child is free to come and tell you, Dad, I'm not feeling good today. I don't want to go to school. Back home, you don't tell your parents you want to stay home. You have to do it, even if you don't want to do it. So here, there's always that's the push for them to be open, talk about things. And that's what the system here promotes. And that's really why we Africans have to engage in the system and be open to accept those change behavior that the system promotes. And I tell my friend, when Africans leave home, we are only leaving the location. We are not leaving the person. So they come in Australia, they plant in here the same African belief, the same African attitude. That they're not allowing the society to interact with you. It's that blockage of I'm African, I have to be African here. Even though there's help, I don't seek help. This is what we want to break, is that stigma of talking about mental health. In this society, it's promoted, there's resources there. There is help if you want help. But people just don't go because they plug in the African out home and plug it in here and just refuse to open the doors for them to receive help. And that is the problem we are having. And I think the man here is going to be the man we define by the way we speak about this too.
I can just imagine a case of an old man listening to our conversation right now and thinking what these young men are talking about is a very critical issue. But what we are not aware of is that this would dilute our belief system, and our belief system strongly ties to culture. What would you say to a person who holds that sort of thinking?
Yeah, look, even in this paper, we found that cultural beliefs are strong barriers to our mental health seeking behavior. It came out really quite strongly. And I think I don't underestimate what cultural belief does to us. The discussion we had today was similar thing. I had a friend who was telling his story how he's gone through struggles, and all he did each time the struggles, he confronted them is to put a song from Donwell and listen to it. He said, "Be still." He said that song alone, because of his faith and belief, really gets him through. He believes that song, he hears it, he says, "Look, I'm still, I have to be calm in this situation." So there's a lot of coping mechanisms that we Africans are exposed to. That really does help us. But it becomes counterproductive when we are not open to discussing this issue. And that's because we need a support system of a community that is aware of mental health and able to destigmatize this, able to tell people you can talk about this. We don't see it as witchcraft anymore. We don't see it as craziness. We don't see it as not being man enough. We see it as what it is. It's an illness. It's not like you have diabetes. It's like you have cardiovascular, you have hypertension, you have cancer. Why don't you talk about it? Why don't you ask for help? That's what mental illness is. It's a chronic condition. So people need to understand that this is a health situation. If you have diabetes and you have help, you have medications to take, don't you go to hospital to say, "Can you help me? My blood sugar is high." That's what mental health is. That's what mental illness looks like. So we want to make our community understand it from that dimension. And then it's easier not to dilute the culture, but understand that this is an illness. We're not saying the cultural belief is wrong. It's only bad when it starts to stop you from seeking help when you need one. Because why don't we use culture to say, if you have diabetes, don't go to don't go to doctor, just sit at home and it will go. No, if you have any illness, you have your foot, have any injury, your foot is amputated. You're not helping yourself. So there's a lot of that we can connect to say, look, this is our culture. It's good for some of those things that we believe in them. We don't want to dilute that. But when that culture to promote good behavior, positive behavior, how then do we make that? It's making sure people understand what mental illness is about. And that language is a problem. How we need to start breaking that.
Lesedi makes a very interesting point during our conversation. Lesedi is one of my previous guests. She is a scholar at UNISA, the University of South Africa. And she says when she engages her participants, what she would often get is they would say, whenever we express ourselves, we would be told, these are white people's illnesses. We are not supposed to have those illnesses, you know? Have you came across such? Have you heard such?
We do regularly. And I tell you what, it used to be our belief then back home. And I tell you why, because at that point, if you remember, our women were not working at some point, It was mostly the man who provides for the family. And here we are in a society where one income is not enough. The wife has to work, the husband has to work. So we are both subjected to stress. And one word or the other. So that level of stress that we had back home is not similar to what we are facing here. Even now in back home, it's changing as well. Now people are aspiring for different things. Male and women alike. There's job for men, there's job for women. Everybody's struggling. We're in that system. So we are now engaged in similar way. So at this point, you can imagine where two people are struggling to raise the family, there are kids involved, there are expectations from back home. There's a lot of things. There's competition in society now. There's the aspiration to go higher in your academics. These things are getting tougher. And if we keep the same belief that we had back home and still think that we are surviving that, then that's a mistake. Because now the job is both parties. At that point, the men can be stressed, but the women will calm them down because they are home, they are making sure the food is ready. But here, even the man can be the person who's making the food because sometimes the woman is at work, doing night shift. The man comes back, he has to help the family too. So both teams are now being exposed to similar stressors. And now we are all on that same page. So imagine when there's nobody calming you down. We are all going through the same thing. The challenge is tougher. So this is why we have to start listening, doing things differently, because then it's no more a white man thing. The same white man culture, we are both working. The same white man culture, we both have career. The same white man culture, we are both aspiring to travel, to do things, to educate ourselves. Initially, the women stayed home. They weren't even being educated back home. Women have to be house mothers, taking care of the kids. They weren't going to school like the men did. But here, both parties are doing similar things. So if we're allowing those white culture to be part of our lifestyle now, why then is this a difficult switch? Because you're exposing both parties to similar stressors. So I guess we have to look at it in a different way. The culture is still there, but the times have changed. The dynamics of the family has changed. And now this is where it becomes a problem. If we keep those there, then we cannot deal with the situation ahead of us. So it has to be a change of behavior and attitude as well.
Is this a part where we finally agree that culture is dynamic and we have to allow it to change from time to time as circumstances push us?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
In your article, you speak about first-generation voluntary African migrants. So what are first-generation voluntary African migrants?
We wanted to avoid any impact of trauma in our people. So those who migrated outside their country of origin for work purposes, they migrated as students, they migrated voluntarily, and they sought for the opportunity to migrate for better living. Those we classified as first-generation African migrants. Now, those are different from people who came into Australia out of being forced to leave from war. those come with a little different kind of dynamics of trauma, remembering what happened home, and some may not even have wanted to be here. Those were not voluntary migration. So we wanted to avoid those particular set of people to contaminate what we are looking at as those who, I left my home country because I want to be here for this reason, for opportunity. The other thing is there are people who were born here, but they are born to African parents. They also have a different dynamic as well. So those conditions will be different from what they're exposed to, the kind of environment they are raised, what they are coming in the journey with. So those are the people that we also excluded. So we are only looking at people who have left their country of origin for the reasons that we've explained, like work purposes, joining their spouse here, they're here as students. Those are the people that we thought it is good to look at this demographic because that is also increasing in number. The amount of people moving outside our countries to study for better life is really astronomical now. So we thought as this increase, and if we don't have a baseline of what's happening, we cannot monitor what the changes are. So why don't we start talking about it? Because it's going to get bigger in future. So that's what we looked at in the paper.
Okay. Thank you for that. You also speak about first generation and second generation migrants. Can you distinguish between the two?
I think the second generation for us were migrants who were born of parents of migrants. So, for instance, my kids are they're second generation of migrants. They were born here. And so they are still Africans, have similar, some belief that we try to build upon them, but there are also certain belief that the environment, the interaction with friends here, their schooling here have already inculcated in them, which is different. So I think those were the people that are different from us that came out from our home countries coming here for better future. So these are the things that we try to distinguish in our paper as well.
Okay. Do you mind providing the most important themes that emerged as you were conducting your research? I saw somewhere you were talking about postnatal depression, and that was interesting for me. I've never really came across such a paper that places focus on parents, because when I read that section, it's more on the mother than the child. But what is common in our society is that the focus, especially from health professionals, would be on young children. What's the story there?
Yeah, that is a dimension of the paper that we never saw coming. So during the review process, we found that most of the papers we were reading were really coming from mothers who have had their children in their new country of origin. So where they migrated to, during their process of childbirth, we noticed that mothers were speaking more about them not being the focus of care. So remember back home, when you're going to have a baby, there are so many family support you get. In fact, in your home, you virtually just sit down and the food is made, passed on to you. People take care of your children, help you to care for the older ones. People like there's brothers and sisters, uncle, aunts, cousins, all around you, trying to make you have this safe delivery because they don't want you to be stressed. When you leave your country of origin, it's difficult because, getting that support, if you're going to pay for it, is expensive. You can't even have it money because of the cost that brings upon the family. Now, even then, there's no family support. Some don't have parents here, mothers here, who are going to help you, talk you through when you face those difficulties during pregnancy stages. Who are you going to talk to? This is how I feel, and tell you this is what you can do, my daughter, man. So that wasn't there. So the women were like, once we put to bed, the doctors are really keen to make sure that our kids are doing okay. They're not even asking about me. And you go through this postnatal depression and nobody's caring about how you're doing because the focus now changes to the child. Now, it becomes difficult when in their own home space, the spouse is not supportive again. The spouse is not helping you, say, for instance, to make dinner when you're just recovering from childbirth. They're not helping you to make sure the kids are okay. They're not supporting you when you're feeling that way, somebody to comfort you. That became a topic. That look, we lack the support. Besides that, even the communities too are not seeing that need to come and support and help. Who comes to check on you? The midwives come, they're very keen to look at the kids, the child, and make sure they are doing okay, but they're not asking the mother, how are you going? So that focus changes. And that's what we found in the paper that we said, look, hold on, I think women are talking about this more. Can we start looking into this side of things? How do we better support women when they go through that childbirth here? Having a child in a Western country is tough. It's tough when you have no parents around. After that, you also have to go back to work. Remember, both have to work to make ends meet. There is actually no support system that kind of pays your rent, for instance. If your husband doesn't provide or it's not enough for the family, you need to get up and go to work the next day. I had a friend here who just put to bed. She was at home for just 1 week. 1 week after, she's back at work. She's back at studies. She's doing her school. She's working because they need that to survive. These are young families just in their life, and here she is, pregnancy, and she puts to bed. There's work. The bills are there. They're waiting for you. So that pressure is there. And the mothers feel it more because that is the time of recovery that's being cut short, and they have to get back to the workforce. And that comes with its challenges as well. So that's something that really came out strongly in our paper as well.
Okay. Migrants leave their countries to Europe due to negative effects of climate change. This is one of the statements I took from the article. Do you mind unpacking this for us? What's this climate change doing, leading us to leaving our African countries? And if it's affecting us as bad, how is it different on the other side?
I think that's what one of the articles actually. So we didn't see so many other strong evidence on that space. But again, if you look at it back home, and the climate change is not just only what's happening around you in terms of environment. It's also the climate change in the political landscape. It's the climate change in things that you find that your aspirations are not being met. It is change in the countries we live in where you feel unsatisfied with the situation. And you don't see hope for the future. The government is not tackling things that they need to tackle head on. And here you are in the country, the opportunities to go somewhere else and achieve those dreams. So that's really what's pushing us to migrate. And when we migrate, then comes with that cultural shock. The expectations are just going to be a wonderful city. Yes, I'm in Australia, good place, light is on 24/7, the roads are beautiful, there are high scrapers anywhere. But again, here's the challenge of how do I survive? In a new culture where you're very cautious of the way you talk to people. People misunderstand you easily. The tone of our voice looks like we are shouting when we are discussing. But that's our culture. The white person here doesn't get it. No, he's very angry because of the tone that you're using. So you have to learn a different way of talking. Imagine if for a 30, 40-year-old person, be orientating yourself to talk in a way that you're not seen as being aggressive. Trying to learn a different way of language, subtle nature that wasn't in you all along. So that comes with a shock, and people get into trouble for that. It's a place where you really watch the way you tell somebody, whether you're a male or a female, it's hard to talk about it. You're conscious of everything you do. So that shock is really there. And when you come into that system, great place, I love it, and then you find yourself, oh, hold on, this is tough. I tell you a story of there was a girl I was speaking to sometime in the States. I was chatting with her doing one of my research work. I said, Levi, when I left Ghana, I went to the US. What shocked me the most was one day when I was coming out of the car that I rented, and I opened the door, and the door hit the car beside me in a parking space. And the woman in that car just came out and was asking for my insurance. And I said, sorry. She said, no. Can I have your insurance? I said, she said, oh, in my country, I'll just say sorry. The scratch was just little and I'll move on. But here, they're taking details to ask me to fix the car. So that she was really shocked. Oh, but this is a very little thing. It's not a major damage. But that's the culture. That's what you face when you're here. Those kind of things will put you, set it back a bit. Hold on. The environment here is different. Now, I can't even say sorry. I just have to give them my license number. And my insurance will cover the repairs. I didn't know it's going to be that way. So you see the changes. There are things that you see every day that makes you go, okay, hold on. I actually moved for the sake of what's happening in my country that I didn't like. The climate there wasn't okay for. But here it's a different climate that you're going to meet with a different challenge. So preparing our mindset just before we head out to that journey is important. Ask somebody, call somebody who is there, talk to somebody in that place. Read as much as you can, research about the country. Because what you're thinking you're running away from may not actually be the easiest part when you get there. There are other challenges you have to then start dealing with. But the earlier you know about this, prepare your mindset, I think the better you're going to do when you get in there. So that's really where the dynamics of climate change came to us.
Interesting. That example you just made comes as a shock to me, because here in South Africa, I've been banned twice. Once in KZN and in a traffic light in Port Elizabeth. And the first thing I did was to ask for insurance details from both these parties before I assisted them, because they needed help. And their insurance pays out my insurance after they sort me out.
Right.
So for me, what you're saying is actually a shock as well, because we do things differently here as well. So I guess I would be more shocked if I went to maybe Nigeria as opposed to when I was in the US, because the expectation would be, if I scratch your car, you will ask for my insurance details.
Exactly. Yeah.
You then, in the article, provide stats. 21 million reside in other African countries. 19.5 million live outside Africa, of which 11 million are in Europe. Are the experiences the same for Africa migrants and Africa Europe migrants?
So we looked at those papers because I wanted to draw some narrative around it. And generally, irrespective of where we migrate to, we experience similar kind of issues. The barriers to seeking help were almost about the same. Our cultural belief is too strong. So for that, it's hard for us to seek for help. It is the belief that something happens to you is witchcraft. So you have to deal with it with religion. It's a belief that we can pray God into any situation and we're well. This is coming through despite the community that you're looking at. Despite where you are, mostly in the Western country. And we also found that if people had good communication English language and they had better education, they were more likely to seek for help. Those were facilitating us to seeking help. And we also thought if this had community supports, community groups, were a good way for them to also interact and cope with their situation. People who had spouses that supported them, those who were able to see this as an illness and were open to seeking help, were also more or less likely to go through this the severe impact of mental health. So I think those were similar across the board. There were different studies showing us different, but when you mix them all together, it means that we are all struggling. Africans, irrespective of where we travel to, we struggle with the system and being able to ask for help. And again, that also links us back to that first generation migration. The situation might be, I'm interested to look at what our children see this as. I watched some of the YouTube videos from a colleague who is doing the work, I think in Western Australia. She has some of the videos on LinkedIn. And I was studying, watching most of the videos from young people who are still in school here, high school students. These are people who were born here. And the stories are not different. In fact, they are surprised that they are being treated as strangers, as visitors. We are born here. We go to the same school. But again, people don't see us as we belong. And they are facing similar situations. They withdraw from studies. Some had to drop out of school because they are being bullied. They are being called names. They are being seen as black people, And they were like, I'm like, really? So even our kids are not spared. Even our children are going to face similar things. So it doesn't really matter somehow. Although we're looking at the first generation migrants, the second generation are also feeling similar things. But in a different dimension. These are people who were born here. They already know the system. Like, hold on, even if my dad felt this, why should I? I was born here, so my belief system is different. I understand the environment, and I speak similar English. My intonation is clear. I speak like an Aussie, but yet they are facing similar conditions. So you can see where this whole thing is a spiral. If we start dealing with it, it has to start from us to start taking our minds and telling our kids that this doesn't have to be your situation. we can change this narrative. I think that has
Definitely.
impact on the case as well.
Definitely. Dr. Lisette's work, the one I mentioned earlier from UNISA, looks into that. She actually does an analysis. I think it's still called content analysis, even if it is extracted from videos. So she looks at different videos that are published out there, and she speaks of the three different stages before, but this is now in the context of violence in communities or in countries. So there's that phase before, and then there is during the violence itself, and then after the events when things seem to have settled. And she articulates that that's actually when we start seeing major problems, because those children would be experiencing what we normally refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder, and that lives on for life. But again, I think, like yours, the study still calls for further research and calls for interventions as it relates to refugees, because she mainly focuses on refugees. Maybe as a concluding question for you, Doc, having done this beautiful study, which I think is a beautiful foundation for the work that you are now starting as you push towards some form of interventions. Do you think your study answers the question on mental health and help-seeking behavior in first-generation voluntary African migrants?
Look, it does. It does. And the very short answer is there's nothing else that answers it than this paper. You know, in reviewing this article, we had to look at more than 1,000 papers, screen them down to about 8 studies that we found met the criteria to be reviewed thoroughly. And those 8 papers were divided. Some had qualitative design, some were quantitative design. And when we merged these 2 papers together, it's saying the same story. The story that our mental health seeking behavior is poor. That's the underlying summary here. And we have to start doing something to address that. It's even worse in people who are going through postnatal depression in women. So that is another bigger finding that way. So in that space, it does answer the question as to what is the nature of the voluntary African migrants' mental health seeking behavior. It answered that question that we had a very poor state. We have to do something. I will do something now. Now, the other thing that it doesn't answer, it doesn't tell us the prevalence of these mental health problems, because we only had one paper that had shown that 44% of African migrants experience depression and anxiety. That's only one paper across the board that we looked at. Now, we also need robust studies to look at the prevalence of those conditions in our own context, in Australia or anywhere else. So that's a study that we are doing currently. So we study that we are doing, we show what that prevalence is within the context of people we've been able to reach. Now, it is hard to quantify the burden if you don't know how many people are going through that. All this anecdotal evidence, there's all interviews telling us that there's a problem here, but we haven't been able to quantify that. And that's what this follow-up studies will do for us. And then we can start looking at what's the burden of this in our community. How do we get government in? Because government talk about numbers. They'll ask you, how many people do you think are facing through this? We don't have that answer at the moment. And then they don't know how much investment will go into it, what they do. So these are where these studies are leading us to. And with all these discussions, there are other groups I can bet you are looking at it as well. Because they listen to this podcast. They listen to our paper. They read the studies. Other researchers are looking at us because there seems to be a lot happening in that area now. So there's awareness, there's increased sensitization. So people are now looking at how can we work together to help in this space. And so is that symposium I'm telling you, the 7th of August. It's one of the key drivers of that is these findings and what we all see within our community. Say, look, I think we need to talk more about this. And getting this group together would be a good way to start discussing that. So it does answer that question here. It opens up more areas of research.
Well, thank you so much, Doc. I really appreciate your contribution to this conversation. I think it's a very important work that you are doing. And I think you've got so much on your shoulders waiting for you. It is my wish within yours that you would get policymakers involved in this study, because I think for me, what this study sort of does is to be like an eye opener for your policymakers. I'm already seeing ambassadors from different African countries partaking in the study as well, because they need to be aware of such things so that they can help influence policy in some way within these developed nations where we find African people. But also, similarly, I hope it happens within Africa itself, because we also see these challenges as well. They are not only in the developed part of the world, but we see them here home as well. So it's my wish within yours that you get as many stakeholders as possible to be a part of this drive that you are taking with your colleagues. That said, thank you very much for being a part of our Harvest episode, and I wish you well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And I think this discussion only starts from here. There's a lot of things that we can do together. What you're doing is great, because people listen to this in South Africa, they start thinking about it too. People listen to it here, they start thinking. So we want those lines to connect. We want to make sure that both parties back home and here, we start seeing this as an illness and not craziness, not something that you can't talk about, not witchcraft. It's an illness, and that illness needs treatment. That's where we have to start from.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dad. Have a nice day.